میکنید از بیروت کنفرانس افق نو بعد از روز دوم هستش. سخنران اولمون آقای مانوئل اوکسن رایتر هست از آلمان، یک نویسنده و مبارز فرهنگی که بارها تبعید شده به خاطر عقایدش در کشور آلمان. قبلا هم در برنامه عصر در تهران حضور داشته. بعد از اون خانم مهانا هستن. بعد از اون آقای ساوین هست، لئونید ساوین از روسیه. بعد یک پنل خیلی جذاب داریم با حضور آقای الکساندر دوگین، خانم ویتوریا، یک اسلام شناس از سیسیل، تاریخ حضور مسلمین در جزیره سیسیل در قرون وسطا ما قبل از رنسانس، آقای پپه اسکوبار از برزیل و یک نویسنده مشهور جهانی، و آقای انیس نقاش که یه بحثی در ارتباط با وضع فعلی با هم خواهند داشت. برنامه رو از اینجا ادامه میدیم. موفق و مؤید باشید.
Good evening, everyone. Today's afternoon topic will discuss the sanctions and their impact on global and the choice on the global world, and the choices left for the targeted forces to create alternative frameworks. The keynote speaker will be Mr. Manuel. He will be followed by myself and then by Mr. Bassam Abdo Abdallah. This will be followed by the second session by Mr. Tobias Fenning, and then by Sandrella Malaz, who is going to be representing Mateusz Pitskorski. At the end, we're going to have a roundtable discussion here in the middle. This will include Dr. Duggan, Mr. Talib Zada, Pepe Escobar, and Princess Victoria, and not last but not least, Mr. Anis Naqash. Okay, so let's presume.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Manuel Oxenreiter, please come to the podium.
Strongest sanctions ever put on a country. We are at a level of sanction that is far greater than
increase sanctions on Iran.
We have just sanctioned at the highest level of sanctions.
Decided to punish Iran with additional sanctions.
Some very significant sanctions onto Iran. We are at a level of sanction that is far greater than ever before with respect to Iran. Today we did central bank, as you know, and we'll see. They have a lot of problems, not only with us.
Well, we're sanctioned, so I can't go anywhere. I really wish I could go to Brazil. But I can't go anywhere. But here today, the borders of Palestine, very happy. They try to limit you, the U.S., the Treasury Department is very creative in sanctioning members who are born and raised in Israel, have been very creative to sanction us, but it doesn't limit us. The war of communication, the soft war, is very powerful, and today we're very honored to have people from all over the world in our conference, and those who are intimidated by the FBI will come on Skype and present the same thing that we've been doing in the presence. So we just continue on with the grace of God, and this is the way it's going to be. The future is with the truth.
The New Horizon Conference, a chance to reach peace and truth.
It's a pleasure to welcome Mr. Oxenreiter, who in his own right is one of the most important freedom speakers from Germany. And he has been exiled several times from Germany because of his beliefs and has criticism of the Zionism and the Israeli lobby. So he walks a very fine line in Germany where Germany is really possessed by American control. We're very happy to have Mr. Manuel Oxenreiter today in New Horizon, and he's always been a great contributor to our conference. Please, Mr. Oxenreiter.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your kind invitation to Lebanon. And I was listening today and yesterday to all your speeches. And it's a pity that all these speeches are just held here and not at the Munich Security Conference, where they should be heard by the people. But I think we all can change this in future, that we will make a security conference in Beirut, which will be much more important than the Munich Security Conference. But that is future music. One of the main points we need to speak about, also when we speak about sanctions, is the climate of debate. Not the climate change, where everyone speaks now in Europe about, but the climate of debates in Europe. We have now in Europe a climate of debates which doesn't allow anymore a counter opinion. That might sound to many of you a little bit weird, because we are the ones, or not we, but our governments and our NGOs and our political parties and our mainstream media, which tells you always that we are the role models for freedom and for the free speech. But dear Nader, I can tell you, I have nowhere a place of such free speech and open opinion, and also about controversial topics, as I find here in the New Horizon Conference. So for this also, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here. And it is, in Europe, it is regarding any topic. It can regard the topic of being member of NATO. You cannot openly discuss anymore being member of NATO. Those who are pro-NATO will tell you, if you are against NATO, you are a Russian agent or Iranian agent or whoever, so they criminalize you. It regards the matter of migration, what has to do, and we will come to this topic, directly with the topic of NATO. We wouldn't have the situation in Europe if we wouldn't be a member of NATO. It is the topic of LGBT, the so-called gay and lesbian lobby in Europe. You cannot have a counter opinion anymore without being accused of being a fascist. So this is maybe when you are Googling my name, you will very often also find the term fascist. That has simply to do with the fact that we are saying that a couple, a family is a man, a woman, and in a perfect case, their mutual children. By the way, we have now officially recognized in Europe 60 different genders. So we have men, women, and then we have 58 other things. I will not repeat here because I think a keynote speech may only have 20 minutes, but you can Google it yourself. So in all these topics, we have a climate of debate which oppresses counter opinions. And that is the same when it comes to the matter of sanctions. And we are speaking here about sanctions. And I took the headline, and I think you liked it. I said, sanctioned and embargoes as a form of Western masochism. You know what masochism is. We understand under masochism the pleasure of being abused or dominated, or the pleasure of suffering. So why are sanctions, what do they have to do with the pleasure of suffering? And not the pleasure, it's not sadism, it doesn't mean the pleasure of letting someone else suffer. It means really the pleasure of suffer yourself. So there are many other forms of Western masochism we spoke about. It is to give free nuclear submarines for Israel. This is German masochism. Weapons for Saudi Arabia. This is masochism. We just had a short interview where I explained you would never give your own gun to a street gang where you exactly know that sooner or later the street gang will use these weapons against you, yourself, or against your friends. But that is actually what the German politics, not just the weapon industry, we have always to to focus on the politics, not just on the industry. This is what the politics is right now doing in Germany. Or to give the LGBT communities all these privileges, which is a general attack against the institution of the family. So sanctions and embargoes, we can say, can mostly seen as a pleasure of being abused or dominated, or to enjoy the taste of suffering. Embargoes and sanctions are almost always a geopolitical instrument. So they are used to punish someone for something. So we punish, for example, Iran because we say they are so close before developing the nuclear bomb and we are so afraid of it. Or we use it against Vladimir Putin because we say he invaded Crimea and eastern Ukraine. We use it against Syria because we say Bashar al-Assad is the Hitler of Damascus and is slaughtering down his people. By the way, all these arguments about sanctions and embargoes have nothing to do with facts and truth. They have to do with politics. So maybe this was one of the revivals of fake news when we started using the measure of sanctions and embargoes again. And this is the most important point, sanctions and embargoes almost always turn out as a geopolitical boomerang. You all know what a boomerang is. It's this Australian instrument. You throw it, it makes a big blow, and then it hits your head again. So we throw it against someone, but it comes back to us and hits ourselves. I want to give you the example of Syria, because this is maybe the most, in a nutshell, the most interesting example for using the geopolitical boomerang in a geopolitical context. In end of 2010, that was 1 year before the so-called Arab Spring, end of 2010, a German business delegation came to Damascus and was really amazed about everything. So they enjoyed it. There were a lot of newspaper articles and interviews, and there was even a German state secretary with them. And they all found the perfect circumstances for German, Syrian, bilateral projects with Damascus. Bashar al-Assad was called a good and courageous reformer, and that he opens his country for the investments. Everything was fine. Only some months later, I think it was in March, the Arab Spring started. And all of a sudden, Bashar al-Assad was not anymore the good economic reformer. He was the butcher of Damascus. And later on, and you all remember these headlines, especially in British newspapers, he became the Hitler of Damascus. The same people who praised him all of a sudden turned him down to the nothing, or turned him down to the devil. The German government was one of the first governments then in 2011 which pushed for economic sanctions and embargoes. And one of the embargoes, the first ones they were pushing for, was the oil embargo. Now we all know that Syria is not the #1 oil country, because if it was, it would have been democratized by the US many years before. But since it didn't play that big role, that didn't happen until then. So for that we have to know that 90% of the Syrian oil exports went into EU countries. For the EU, the Syrian oil imports were 0.8%. That means in the eyes of the European Union and Germany, their damage is very big. Our damage is very minimal, because we can always replace this 0.8% by some other imports. What is also important to understand in the background, that these 90% exports to the EU were covering 1/3 of the Syrian state income for Damascus. We have to never forget this number, 1/3. So all of a sudden, 1/3 of the state income was cut. The argument of the German government was very easy. They said, if we cut down the Syrian state income, in this moment they cannot pay anymore their state officials, they cannot pay anymore their army, they cannot anymore pay their police. In this moment the rebels can take over the country, because everyone will simply run away. That was the general idea. So we will weaken down the Syrian army, and the so-called Syrian opposition, rebels, in reality terrorists, we all know it here, will get into a stronger position. But already back in 2011, alternative media and also our media, like my Zuerst magazine, but many other magazines in Europe, and many online magazines were warning that the embargo will hit the whole state structure. The 1/3 was not concentrated just on the army. This 1/3 is also spent for the education structure, for the health structure, for the infrastructure, for the inner security. Inner security, I mean the simple police and the simple law enforcement. We all know that in these times of 2011 and 2012, all of the sudden a lot of kidnappings took place in Syria because it was very easy. The army was very busy with fighting against intruders from other countries with an influx of terrorists. So it was very easy, for example, to kidnap your rich neighbor and to get maybe or hopefully some ransom. And if you didn't get the ransom you wanted, then you were simply selling him to the Free Syrian Army, and they had maybe measures to push a little bit for more ransom or to make the whole thing a little bit more economical for them. The embargo can weaken down the Syrian army and their fight against terrorist forces, which were pushing with Western support against the big urban centers in Syria. We shouldn't forget in this context also that in 2012 there was a big battle around Damascus, which we can directly connect to the sanction politics of the West. So the Syrian army managed, despite the sanctions, despite the oppression, despite the limitations of their goods, of instruments and of resources, they managed to defend their capital. In 2012, and that was then also very interesting, we had a lot of, I was in Syria by that time very often, we had a lot of interviews. We were predicted that there are now a lot of young people suffering under the sanction policies since universities couldn't work anymore as they worked before. The infrastructure cannot be held in form as it was possible before. The people were slowly losing their future perspective, and we were told we have to expect maybe 500,000 to 1 million refugees or migrants coming to Europe. What happened later, we know from 2015. In 2015, we welcomed since 2015, we welcomed more than 2 million migrants, not all from Syria, but a lot of them claiming that they are from Syria, to Germany, who are not war refugees. I saw war refugees in Syria myself, but who were the children or who were the men of those families who could afford to send their people to Europe and to get the advantages in Europe they couldn't get anymore in Syria itself. So that was one of the direct consequences of the sanction policy. So the boomerang arrived in Germany precisely in September, October 2015. That is not even 4 years. So we predicted something like 2017, 18, but the boomerang was very quick in this thing. And the boomerang hit those who were not responsible for those policies. So the consequences are that we have a rise of crime rate in Germany. We have a lot of problems in integration of these people. We have also the problem that people, for example, criminals from Syria who were joining the terrorist forces, later on took the advantage and went with the refugee stream to Europe. So they got double financing. So they were first financed as rebels or as terrorists in Syria, and then they got their economic help as refugees when they went to Germany. In Germany, the people who suffer under this type of this type of geopolitics, of sanctions and embargoes, are not the politicians. This is not Angela Merkel, and these are not the politicians of the Bundestag. These are the ordinary people who are told, by example, by their mayors, that their daughters should take today another way to the school and not necessarily cross the way of the refugee home, because there might be some problems. That is what happens on a daily scale today in Germany, even if you don't read about this in newspapers. But we have an alternative media in Germany which is now reporting about these things. The embargo politics decreases security in Syria and in Germany. So that is what I mean. It is a policy punishing both civilian groups. And the embargo policies harms the economy in Syria and in Germany. Germany has really no economic plus already right now by the influx of migrants. Syria has a big damage because among these refugees are people which are now in the building or in the rebuilding process necessarily needed in Syria. So this was one example I wanted to present to you in this hopefully not too long keynote speech, and I look forward for other aspects of sanctions and embargoes, and I look forward for a debate with you, my friends, and especially also with you about the topic, because I think that this will be a crucial topic always when we speak in future about the context of military and of economic intervention in other countries, especially as Mr. Escobar said, in the global south. And the consequences of this, that the consequences is that the global south will come to the global north, and then we will have there to deal with it. I thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward for the debate.
If somebody would like to raise a question from Manuel, you're welcome, or you want to add a comment to what he just said, you're welcome at this point. Okay, let me just ask a question myself. This is a little bit beyond the question of sanctions. It has to do with your own plight. Mm-hmm. You had a magazine in the past, and you're very active. How has the German government grip on people like yourself become more severe as time is going on, or has it become more lax?
Well, as you see, I am now on a long holiday since several months. Just as a background, there is going on an investigation against me, and I decided, instead of waiting and sitting, and my close friend Mateusz Piskorski, who was sitting for 3 years for nothing, literally for nothing in prison, and we will hear his speech, I think today or today, right? Yeah. What is, in my opinion, one of the most important speeches, and so I didn't hesitate for 1 second to decide I go into a longer holiday to wait what there is going on. Generally, I do my magazine still. I do it from foreign countries right now. I use my free time here in Lebanon after here. By the way, this is my first public appearance since I went away from Germany in January. So thank you. So because German media is writing that I went underground, and to go underground, in den Untergrund gehen, in German has an even worse meaning than to go underground, maybe in English. In den Untergrund gehen means like I buy 10 Kalashnikovs and the ammunition and wait for action, like founding a terrorist group. No, what I simply did is I left my country, I went on holiday, and I decided that I will not be bothered by the media and by some state officials who think they can make a career on my back.
Also, as an introduction and prelude to what Sandrella is going to talk about and read the paper of Mr. Piskorski, you met Mateusz in Tehran, actually, for the first time. Is that right, or did this?
We knew each other from emails and so on. Very, like I know a lot of people from email exchange, but in Tehran we became friends, and later on I would even say we became best friends, yes.
And you started working together?
Yes, we are still working together, and we are in a frequent contact. And after the Congress in 2014, we worked very intensively together, and that is really also thanks to you.
Oh, Alhamdulillah, it's very good. But what bothered us is that Piskorski was jailed and kept in jail for 3 years,
yes,
without any proof, very similar to what Mr. Kazem was saying an hour ago, 2 hours ago, of his plight, that without finding any proof or witness, you're jailed.
Yes. In Europe.
In Europe.
Yes.
And just a word about how far is Poland, how American is Poland now?
How Merkel is Poland now? Well, regarding my situation and regarding the talks I had with Mateusz said it would be good if Poland would be maybe a little bit more Merkel, because he always expected that Germany is a little bit more a law state than Poland. We shouldn't forget that Poland and also the Baltic states are, or were the states, hosting illegal American detention centers. I mean, things like we witnessed it two days ago, that these things exist, and they exist not in Middle East, and they don't exist somewhere in some banana republic. They exist in Poland, and Poland is a country of the European Union. So he expected that Germany would be in these things a little bit more cool, a little bit more law state. But thanks to the European Union, we learned that it is enough when one of such countries like Poland is just issuing something against any EU citizen, and then the investigation and the oppression starts.
Okay, well, I wish you success and health in the future, and keep yourself standing, that you can continue the war.
Absolutely, we won't give up.
Yes.
We won't give up at the end.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just say a word before she starts. Zaina has been, for the past 10 years, working very closely in almost every aspect of what I've been doing. And the New Horizon Conference communication work for this, especially this conference, and the previous ones, the one in Mashhad, which became very controversial, and the previous one before that about the Afro-Americans, the two on the Afro-Americans, one in Baghdad, one in Najaf to Karbala, in Arba'in, and on the brink about the Afro-American plight, were almost basically done through her communication, which is tireless and 24 hours. So I'm very glad and very honored that today she is one of the speakers, which she deserves to be a speaker in this conference.
Thank you, Nader. Thank you. I'm not going to talk about myself as much as I'm going to talk about what happened to us, because whatever happened to me also sort of happened to Nader. We've been designated as a global terrorist, SDGT, but
along with two other of our colleagues,
yes,
Mr. Montazemi and Mr. Ashkavi, also in New Horizon. In other words, as soon as we announced that the New Horizon Conference is going to be held in Lebanon, it ascended from SDN to SDGT. That's just what I wanted to say.
right. But this did not come just suddenly. There were preliminary factors and things that happened before that stage. I remember 10 years ago when I was in the Emirates, I was a lecturer at the University of Sharjah and the head of the English Language Center in the Emirates at the University of Sharjah. Nader had come to visit me. And I remember a couple of times, and then I remember the CID, which is the Central Investigation Department in the Emirates, in Sharjah in particular, came at 3 a.m. in the morning, banging on the doors, demanding to see Nader, and accusing me of being what is it called? A sleeping cell. And I think the people living here in Lebanon, Hezbollah sleeping cell. And in 2009, a lot of deportation took place in Lebanon. And I remember, now I just saw my friends over here. Assalamu alaikum. I remember when I came here to Lebanon and we started in NGOs in order to help the Lebanese deportees. So this started about 10 years ago. I remember during the interrogation by the CID, they focused on two things, basically, three things. One of them, and that took the largest time, was that what is my relationship to Nader, and in terms of what do you know about his program? When I first met Nader and we talked and we got married, I was living in the Emirates, he was in the UAE. I don't remember him talking about a program which is called Raz. Can you just give them what it was, please?
Raz is the first television, live television show that criticized many things in Iran, including Iran's banking system, Iran being one of the worst countries in the world in terms of that the rich don't pay taxes. So it was the first time we got a chance to criticize some things that would change the infrastructure and the economy of the country, and it led to many other programs. So, and of course, about 50% of the programs was interviews with American dissidents, whistleblowers. So this is the first time Iranians, for the first time, saw people like Michael Malouf or Geraldi or Ray McGovern. This is how, for the first time, Iranians got a view of what is happening within the U.S. But of course, at that time, I didn't tell Zaina about because the subject hadn't really come up. And this is exactly what she was being interrogated about that program in Iran.
And to tell you the truth, I wasn't at all into politics before I met Nader. I was like a mall crawler, just living a normal life. And then, and the only thing that I knew about Nader at that time was that he was a filmmaker who made the Jesus movie. And this is the way that he was presented to me. And then suddenly I get the CID coming in telling me that, no, you're involved with all this. So that means that they've been basically following him for a while. The other thing that I got questioned about was that a magazine that my dear friend over here, Mr. Mehdi Nasiri, had started from the Iranian Cultural Center and the embassy. He approached me and we created an interfaith, nothing to do with politics, an interfaith magazine, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism in English in the Emirates, and it was registered, and there was no sponsorship. And I remember that we both put in money. It was private money, no sponsorship whatsoever from any other entity. Anyway, so again, this was the second part of the second thing that I was accused of. And the third thing, in 2000, if you remember, in 2000 there was war in, Lebanon had, the south has been sort of eradicated of Israel. My house was destroyed. And in 2006, again, it was destroyed again. So I was sending money over to my father to rebuild the house. And according to them, I was the money that I was, transferring to Lebanon from my account to my father's account was considered terrorist money. And this is money going into rebuilding a house that Israel had destroyed. So this is the first time, and of course, then I was deported. My money was taken away. I lost my job, and I was put in jail for a very short period of time. They even took my SIM card, and I'm not just talking about this did not just happen to me. This happened to many well-off Shia Muslim Shia people, residents living in the Emirates. And everybody knows about this. So this is the first time that I got accused of being a terrorist and so forth. Having said that, also many other Iranians and Iraqis were also deported from the Emirates. One of them is also my colleague over there, Mr. Mehdi Nasiri. Who did you were doing some, community work, nothing related to politics whatsoever. Anyway, the focus is the sanctions, SDGT. The first time we got to know about it was that Nader called me, and one afternoon, saying, Zaina, I think you and I have been put on the OFAC's Treasury Department's list as SDNs, according to the Executive Order 1324. Would you like to give just a brief about what it is, the Executive Order, and when did it start?
It's SDN is National Special Designated National. Now, everyone in Iran who's been sanctioned, including the Iranian foreign minister, is SDN, Revolutionary Guard, SDN. Everything that the Trump administration today sanctions in Iran is a special designated national, SDN 13224. Now, this 13224 happened 12 days after 9/11.
It's very important. This thing is very important, 9/11.
12 days after 9/11, the Bush government made a new clause saying anyone that they think as a possible terrorist will be designated as a terrorist, and they will be sanctioned. So they took a free ride, a free reign, and it was called SDN 13224, and every year it has been renewed since 9/11. It's one of the fruits of 9/11. It's one of the gains they got. They created 9/11, they concocted 9/11, and then one of the things, as immediately afterwards, they announced global war on terror. So global war on terror, and immediately Afghanistan was taken over. The plan to take over Iraq was planned, and 2 years later, Iraq was taken over. The bases in the Persian Gulf were increased immensely after that. So the global war on terror and 9/11 had many, many fruits. One of the fruits was SDN 13224, and then the next stage is SDN 13224 SDGT, which is for the commanders usually of Hezbollah. SDGT is that status.
To reach that status, SDGT, we were shocked by it because Nader had decided to have his conference, the conference that you're in, and he announced it that it's going to start to be in Beirut, held in Beirut, and one of the stations here, Al Mayadeen station in Beirut. The minute Nader Talibzada announced that the conference is going to be held in Beirut, of course we had sent an appeal letter to OFAC. we got a reply saying that we are SDGT and our case number is 1582.
Yeah. Anyhow.
Yeah. So, what was the accusation? The accusation. I'm just going to read out the accusations, and then you tell. I mean, it's so absurd. It's laughable. We are anti-Semitic, Holocaust deniers, agents and supporters of IRGC and Quds forces, blacklisted, top alert, accused of promoting weapons of mass destruction, human trafficking, human rights violators, and according to one site that was created by Mujahideen Khalq, IFMAT, we have to be brought to justice. Now, SDGT is a designation, is a designated status provided to the martyr Imad Mughniye, the Hezbollah martyr Imad Mughniye, also another martyr, Mustafa Badruddin. A third one is, two other, may Allah give them long life, two other leaders in Hezbollah. This is an act of war. A lot of people say that Trump has not, sort of gone into actual war, a direct war with a country at the moment. But in reality, this economic aggression is an act of war. We are not allowed to travel. The fact that we come over here to Lebanon there are a lot of precautions to come over here that are being taken. We can't travel to any country, any other country. We cannot sign any legal document, an international legal document. Nader has so much to give in to the world. We were thinking of, for example, promoting his new, the edited format of his series in Italy, for example. Princess. Yes. Can we travel to Italy? I don't know. I don't think so. Let's try. Let's try. But you see, what they're doing is that this is, again, it's passive aggressive, and this has been created by two people. One of them is Stephen Mnuchin, who is the United States Secretary of Treasury, and more particularly by his deputy, Sigal Mendelker. And would you like to say something about them both? I don't have a picture of them.
They're a very creative group within the U.S. administration. The Neocons have become very creative with Trump. Trump, is the first U.S. president who has dared to announce that the capital of Israel is going to be Jerusalem. No other U.S. president would do it. No one really knows how Trump gets a lot of his ideas, and no one knows the name of John Hagee, an American evangelist who boasts that it was my idea and I persuaded Trump to announce that the capital would be Jerusalem and the U.S. embassy will be taken to Jerusalem. You have to research that yourself, and you just find out who John Hagee is and the effect that he has had secretly on the administration. People, evangelists like John Hagee, Jerry Falwell, and the others have had immense amount of influence after the Islamic Revolution of Iran. The White House never had evangelists in it. And there was never prayer sessions as during the Reagan era, during the Bush-Son era. Oliver Stone, the great American filmmaker, made fun of this in one of the sequences in his film W, where they all sit together and pray. Anyhow, Trump is the guy who has done things, a very erratic president, and one of the things he's done is in the Treasury Department and OFAC, the sanction regime against Iran, which is the most severe, and we're just one part of the sanctions, and as we're giving you first-hand experience of what we experienced, and the latest sanctioned person was Mr. Zarif, and the Central Bank of Iran a couple of days ago So this group, which includes Steve Mnuchin, by the way, people don't understand how come Steve Mnuchin's name is Mnuchin.
Yes.
It's actually Menachem.
Yes.
He is from Hebrew background, but so he wants to sort of get people lost in that aspect. So he takes the M-E out, so it's Mnuchin, and the M is turned into N. But the real obsessive, crazy character is Sigal. She's very obsessive. She knows people, and she has a system of finding out who's doing what. And one of those targets, of course, has been our conference since about 8 years ago. And they were sensitive about why we bring together Western dissidents, especially U.S. whistleblowers, as where the straw broke the camel's back. Hence, this is the acceleration of speed of the sanction regime, which happened, and it's continuing on. I mean, just recently, Trump announced again that Iran is going to be sanctioned even further.
There are two things over here, just to end my talk. One is that why I'm saying these things, why am I on this podium, why are we talking about this? First of all, is to sort of spread awareness. We have to know how the enemy works, and we have to counter-attack the enemy. We have to create methods of what we call alternative frameworks, as the topic is. We have to create something. What is the other alternative? Just like in media, you have alternative media. What is our alternative? How can we go about it? Because we have been so quiet for such a long time. Iran has been sanctioned for a while, a pretty long while. Because it has been quiet, because Lebanon has been quiet, whereby if one bank, I think the Lebanese people over here will tell me, that one bank, I think Jamal Trust Bank, was like sort of threatened. Now they're threatening 2 other banks. We have been very quiet about the Lebanese who've been traveling, the well-off Lebanese. We hear one day, this man is being kidnapped, this man is being assassinated, because they have the money. And because their fear is that this money goes into supporting and funding Hezbollah. So what is the alternative? What do we do? This is why we are over here. This is why we're convening. Thank you very much, and I leave you at this. Thank you, Madam.
Okay, go back to your job now.
Okay.
Okay. I think before we continue, I'm just going to give you the good news of a proposition that was made yesterday, that we have a special panel including 4 people. Pepe Escobar suggested, and I think it's a very good suggestion, with Alexander Dugin, Princess Victoria, and we're going to have also Mr. Anis Naqash from Lebanon, to have, and I'll try to moderate it, to have a discussion among us, which will be filmed by a very professional group of documentary filmmakers from Iran who are preparing a documentary about this whole journey. So we hope to have that after all the speeches are over, so we're not limited in time. Okay, Zaina.
Our next guest is Mr. Abbas Abdullah. Sorry, Bassam. It's my eyesight. I'm sorry.
Sir, it's an honor to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we are at your service, please.
Thank you very much. I will speak in Arabic if you allow me. طبعا, if it's easy in English, no problem. We can speak in English. But I'm in Beirut, so I should talk in Arabic, where is this is my native language. Thank you very much for having me in this conference. And absolutely, I came just yesterday from Moscow. And I have, again in English, طبعا أنا أتيت البارحة من موسكو.
Why don't you do it in English, because most people will
It's better?
because the guests want to hear you.
Okay, thank you. I came yesterday from Moscow in the morning, and when Dr. Abdul Halim Fadlallah, he talked to me to participate in this, the New Horizon conference, I was very happy to come to talk to you in front of you, because for many reasons. I know that most of you knows a lot of news about the war in Syria, and I will talk about the sanctions. But we should first of all talk about terminology. If it's sanctions or blockade of the countries, they are blockade us, or it's sanctions. Because when we are using the word of sanctions, it seems to many people that we are out of the law and we are violating international law. Iran not violating international law, Syria not violating international law. We are protecting ourselves under the international law. So this is very important to talk about the terminology. I don't know if we are under sanctions or they are blockade us because, example, Syria, they are blocked us from the all sides. Example, with Jordan, we tried to open borders, and the American commercial attaché ordered to the businessman in Jordan not to do any kind of business, otherwise they will put them on the blacklist. The last example, the international fair, Damascus International Fair. Can you imagine that United States, the superpower of they are afraid of a small international Damascus International Fair, and they put announcement on the website of the American Embassy in Damascus that any businessman, any state, any company will come to this fair in Damascus, we will put them on the blacklist. So we are in front of a not easy situation. Especially, I cannot talk that the situation in Syria economically is very easy, but anyway, we are, after 9 years, we are absolutely, we will continue our resistance because there is a question which I want to answer you. Why this war against Syria? This is a big question. What Syria made in this history? What made Syria as a state against the West? First of all, this is very important answer because after 9 years, I think any Western, my friend from Germany, he talked about the sanctions against Syria, part of it. But I am from the first day, I was on the media, with the Western media, Arabic media, local media, I am talking in Russian language. So I was with many media and I visited many countries. All the time I asked them why you are targeting Syria. This is a very important question. The international decision that this country, this state should be cancelled from the map. This is the international order, what they want. What means cancel this country, this state from the map? It means we should destroy everything in Syria. If you will allow me that when someone attacking your museums, your architecture, your identity, not only economically, it means they want to cancel you or to from the map. This is the international order about against Syria. So another question, why? Because in Saudi Arabia there is democracy, and in Syria there is no democracy. This is a big question, and I discussed that with many people in the West, why you are targeting? Because President Assad, he is a dictator, and King Salman bin Abdulaziz, he is a well-known democratic or other rulers in the Gulf states or in the Arab states. This is a big question. No. For the Western countries, it's not important, democracy, freedoms, because this is a big lie. Some of our friends talked about that, and I remember when I met with many Western journalists, I remember I asked one of them, if you are a very good person and objectively you want to write what you have seen in Syria, can you do that? Or you will follow who is paying money or your salary? She told me, yes, I will write who is paying my salary what to do. It means there is no freedom. So friends, when we are talking about Syria, so we should not speaking a lot of slogans, while we should talk about reality. The main question of, and I will give our friend from Germany, the journalist from Der Spiegel, who kicked him off because he depend on many of not good references during what they call the revolution in Syria. So the war against Syria was one, and we need a lot of studies about the war against Syria. First of the important factor in the Syrian war or war against Syria, the personalization of the war. And this method was made in Yugoslavia, in Libya, in Iraq, and in Syria. Personalization, it means we are not attacking the country. We are attacking only this person, Assad or President Bashar al-Assad. So this is one of the characters of this. And if you will read what they have wrote about the Syrian war, you will find that only Assad, they are repeating everything. The other factor, it's destroying the identity of the Syrian. Identity, it means the history, heritage, which is depending on the coexistence and of diversity of the Syrian people, which we are more than 42 of sect and ethnic groups who are living since thousands of years. The third question, that to have in the region pure Jewish state, Israel, pure Jewish state, not democratic state, we should have Sunni, Shi'i states in the region, which means we should divide these countries because it's opposite of the existence of Israel in the region. Now, why they are using the not economic placket example in Syria? We don't have any kind of airplanes, only from Iran. The only Iran who can send its planes during 9 years of war. There is no other. There is no other countries. And I want here to thank the Iranian people, the Iranian government, because they sent to Syria 2.5 million of oil while we are under sanctions. This is my duty to thank the Iranian government, because this is really strong ally who stayed very strong, and they sent this ship to Syria if the United States want or don't want. So we should thank the Iranian friends for this position. Because in this time, many states, they are afraid to doing. Some of them under the table, some of them on the table, while our Iranian friends on the table, they are staying with Syria. These thanks, including Hezbollah, absolutely, who are proud of to being part of this resistance movement. What I want to mention, the economic sanctions is not easy. Now, the Syrian people, I am one of them. My salary in 2010 was $2,000. Now I have $80, I think, my salary, which is. So it's very effective on the Syrian people, and it's including infrastructure, everything. The last law which was published or issued by the Congress, It's this, what they call it, the Caesar law. You know, it's the 22 of January of 2019, which not only sanctions or placate the Syrian government or Syrian people, either the ally of Syrian government like Iran, Russia, and others maybe. So because of that, we are in front of a very difficult situation. What we should do, this is very important, we should stay and we should die slowly? Absolutely not. Because as they are clever, we are more clever. Because how we could stay in Syria 9 years, this is a big question. How the Syrian people could stay 9 years in front of this fascist war. The war in Syria, we should call it fascist war because thousands of terrorists they sent to Syria. Besides that, economic, besides that, in media against us, besides that, a lot of sanctions. But now, after 9 years, they are more convinced that they cannot defeat Syrian people because the Syrian people steadily stayed to defend their homelands. The question is not relevant to a person or a leader. Either this leader, we are proud of him, President Bashar al-Assad, who stayed 9 years steadily and he defended his country, and we are proud to have this president. The question not here. The question that there is no president in the world can stay 9 years without support of his people. This is absolutely everyone should know. There is no president can stay in his office while his army not with him. There is no one will stay with a country like Syria with the president if he is afraid or if he is hesitant to do. While we are 9 years behind this president, behind our army, defending our existence. The question here, how the Syrian stayed 9 years in front of this fascist war, because many people asking me this question, what happened in Syria? It's unbelievable because the foreign powers put, as Hamad bin Jassim mentioned that on the BBC, he said more than $103 billion. Only Qatar. If we will add others, I think we are talking about maybe $500 billion they paid to finish this country, while we are in front of a new stage in international relations, and we are talking about that. So the question, not the question of democracy, not the question of freedom, not the question of constitution, the question that they want to control Syria, because Syria is a heart of the Middle East. So because of that, this is a big war. What we should do now, the question all the time to European, I am talking, okay, America is overseas, it's far from the Middle East. But European, why they are afraid all the time? Why they don't give us, okay, we are academic, they don't give us a chance to talk to them, to listen, not one ear, but in your 2 ears. This is very difficult. There is now a change situation in Europe generally. We can listen more voices, but not a lot. Yesterday, we had, 2 days ago, we had an Italian delegation, the parliamentarian Italian delegation. Before that, from the Mr. Mariani from France with delegation. But after they finished their visit, a huge attack against them in the media because nobody can talk absolutely. What we should do, I think we should cooperate with the new uprising powers. We cannot stay with now China, Russia, and India. There are a lot of uprisings, but it's not only to talk in words, but we should put a vision for a new world, and it needs absolutely practical steps, not only to have conferences, because we are in front of a not easy situation now. Iran is under sanctions, Syria, Russia, China. So I think we should, it's not my business. I am not a businessman or I am not an economist, but at the end of the day, we should think about the other options. While United States controlling the dollar and while controlling the SWIFT and all economic methods in the international financial system, we should think about another. We are a small state as a Syria anyway, but I think after 9 years we are not tired absolutely, but we are still strong to because we are resisting not only our country, we are resisting the whole civilian people, the whole civilian countries in the world. We faced the worst terrorists you can see or you can imagine. You know that they sent to Syria more than 100,000 terrorists from more than 82 nationalities. So there are a lot of realities and facts you should know. I want, at the end of my words, to thank you very much for this invitation. Mr. Nader, I am first time meeting with you. Thank you very much for this invitation, and I hope that in the next, maybe in the next New Horizon conference, we can meet in Damascus. And I think that this is the best answer to those people who want us, not free people, who want to see us as servants in the houses of the imperialists or the in the houses of who are loving money, who has no moral sides. Because of that, I think we should concentrate on the philosophy, on the films, cinema, music. You can see either in Europe we are not hearing about any philosopher, but we can see a lot of presidents and a lot of political leaders, while philosopher or music we cannot see. This is a sign of catastrophic situation in the world. Money, money, money. We should stop this orientation in the world. We are, at the end of the day, we are people. It doesn't matter what kind of nationality. I am Syrian, you are Italian, he is a French, Russian, but at the end of the day, we have one God, but we are the people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And very good suggestion. But yes, please.
Thank you very much. No, it's not working. No. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. The third letter of the Supreme Leader is quite recent. And as you were speaking, sir, I was thinking of the content of the letter to the youth of the world by the Supreme Leader Khamenei of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And he notes that Western thinkers, Western intellectuals, Western academics, they seem to be able to realize that there are many fundamental crimes in, say, the history of the United States, that slavery was a serious matter, and that the consequences of slavery didn't end with the abolition, formal abolition of slavery. But he notes that there seems to be, in Western circles, an inability to look at what's happening right now and not take into account the reality that major crimes, major genocides are happening today, that this question of a hierarchy of genocides, and I'll avoid a certain word that is almost toxic to even say that word. I'll say a hierarchy of genocides. Well, is what's happening to the Palestinians today, is that a genocide? Because genocide is a legal concept, and there are definitions, and there are prohibitions, and there are meant to be consequences and accountability. Is what's happening today in Syria a genocide? Is what happened in Libya a genocide? And of course I could go on. And how many in Iraq? And how many times do we hear, oh, well, there were this many deaths in Iraq? But they're only referring to the American soldiers who were killed. And the idea is that other kind of lives have less value, and the deaths can be piled up in outlandishly high figures. But it's not so consequential as killing people of the United States of North America. Could I say, be so bold as to say white people? So, you know, there is a rule of law, and as we hear about our new colleagues who have now been designated global terrorists with a list of unproven allegations, these allegations themselves lack any definitions. And so it's a kind of mockery of the rule of law. It's a kind of caricature of the rule of law. But we do have an international system, and genocide has been historically the move to legislate this, to make this a concrete law and to make prohibitions about it. This has been advertised as a kind of accomplishment of the great Jewish scholar, legal scholar Raphael Lemkin. And so, you know, I ask myself about this. One of the aspects of the law of genocide, the law for the prohibition and punishment of genocide, is that if you know about a genocide, you have a legal obligation, not to mention a moral and ethical obligation, but you have a legal obligation to say something, because complicity in genocide is a crime. And I would say, I'm trying to respect the law, and I do see genocides taking place. And I'm trying to be conscientious in the way I use my voice and point out that this is happening. And therefore, I can't be accused in the future of not saying anything. And by the way, when you point to a genocide, what tone of voice should we use? What is the appropriate demeanor to identify a genocide? Part of an aspect of what I faced in Little Lethbridge in southern Alberta when the B'nai B'rith Canada was beginning their inquisition, they went to the police and they asked the police to investigate me for, yes, hate crimes and incitement of genocide. So I have actually faced a legal procedure of sorts, and they didn't charge me with incitement of genocide. Well, what about Mr. Netanyahu? If I can be investigated for genocide, what about an investigation of that sort? Where is there any accountability? I think it was Nader earlier today saying, well, what about Mr. Epstein, who it was becoming quite clear had a kind of operation, a blackmail operation, involving trying to put high officials on film with underage people. And you, I think, said, Nader, that maybe in 10 years we won't get an explanation, but maybe it'll take 10 years for the proper questions to begin to be articulated. So this is a bit of a comment, but Raphael Lemkin went into great detail in his book, The Axis of Occupation, where he came up with this term, genocide, in 1944. And he put a lot of attention to the destruction of museums and national institutions and national memory and liberal education being replaced by kind of technological based education and that kind of thing. So I'm asking the question and pointing to the Supreme Leader's observation, which I think is pertinent. What is wrong with our intellectuals, with our thinking, articulate class of people in the world that seem to be blind to so many contemporary crimes against humanity?
I think you answered it yourself. And it's so comprehensive what you said. Would you like to?
What is wrong with our intellectual? I think there are a lot of wrongs in our intellectual. I am speaking here about the Arab world. Not a lot of people, because the petrodollar buy a lot of intellectual. I'm sorry to tell you, not all the people. Example, I will tell you, in the Syrian case of the war, inside Syria, the intellectual who defended Syria, who understood what kind of plans against the Syria itself, not against Britain, a little. I am one of them, 3, 4. And many of them, talk to us that we are defending corruption or we are defending a dictator, or while the main plan, it said not only against Syria, only against the whole region, from Yemen to Syria. So the question of intellectuals is not easy to answer, but we should work. If I will wait the others, then after we started this process, a lot of people joined us. All the time, historically, you cannot find, either in religious history, you will find that the group of the people, believer, who can believe in this way, not a lot of people. It starts with the small group of the people, then it's expanding like, okay, New Horizon. Maybe after 5 years, you will find a lot of people joining this process. So it needs time. The situation is changing a lot, absolutely. 2010, not 2019, and 2025, not now. Example, Yemeni brothers. Who can imagine that Yemen can do this, change this strategic situation? Nobody can answer. Who believe that Syria could escape from this dirty war against it? Nobody, absolutely. Either small group of people who believe. We talked with our friend Mr. Anis Nakash before that. Many people, they are crazy now in the West. How Syria escaped from their hands? Absolutely, it's thanks to Russian Federation, to President Putin, thanks to Iran, to Hezbollah. But the main factor is the resistance of Syrian people. If the people, Syrian people, was not convinced that they are defending their identity, their homeland, their future of children, and the future of children will be in the hands of ISIS and these terrorists and these crazy people, the Russian cannot help and the Iranian cannot do anything. But the main factor, this is the Syrian people who paid very high price, absolutely. But after that, my friend, the world is changing a lot, including you will find another intellectual, not that intellectual who you can pay in the petrodollar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bassam Abdullah. Thank you very much. Our next guest is Tobias Fenning. Can you please come to the stage?
So, first of all, I think that we are now entering a new phases of history. I think that the time of the conventional warfare has finally been over. I think that the United States, the Trump administration, is more or less recognizing that it's actually impossible to bring down countries like Syria and Iran by conventional means. Surya lan Turka. I think that now the Trump administration, because Trump is coming from an economic background, so the Trump administration is focusing on economic warfare. They're trying to destabilize countries from within. How they're doing this? Just by putting the ordinary civilians under pressure. This is happening basically through different weapons of economic warfare. I think three of these weapons are economic sanctions, of course, the massive devaluation of currencies, and the allowance for the possibility for people to migrate from these target countries to other countries like Europe and the US, like it's also happening with Germany. So let's talk a bit about imperialism. The imperialists have always been very interested in the Middle East. Why? Because actually the Middle East is one of the most important factors to control the global economy. The global economy is addicted to oil. So whoever controls the Middle East, whoever controls all the oil wells, he will basically control the global economy. I think our French friends already made some remarks about it, about the petrodollar, how it all worked. One very important thing is, of course, to say also that after 2014, Russia came not only under sanctions, but into an economic crisis which happened because of the collapse of the oil price. And this collapse of the oil price, it was forced by the US in cooperation with the Saudi regime. So basically, Michael Reagan, the son of Ronald Reagan, told Obama to do the same what already his father did with the Soviet Union. They should just float the market with cheap oil. This will help to defeat Russia after Crimea returned to Russia. This was 2014. So they actually did it. Saudi Arabia pushed on the market with a lot of crude oil, and Saudi Arabia is one of the main exporters of crude oil. 20% of all global exports of crude oil are coming from Saudi Arabia, and the oil price collapsed. We see what happened to the Russian economies. We saw the devaluation of the ruble. We saw how Iran became under attack, how Iran suffered under the low oil price, and so on. Even countries like Venezuela, I think Venezuela is a very good example. They were, not to 90% of their exports were crude oil, and on the other side, 90% of its food was imported. So we saw why there was a massive inflation in Venezuela and so on. So I'm just coming actually back from a meeting with the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and a conference in Syria. And we discussed on this conference with different trade unions from the world how we can start campaigns against the sanctions against Syria. I think it's very important not only to talk about the sanctions against Syria, but we're seeing sanctions against so many states. There is Iran, there is Syria, there is Cuba, there is Yemen, there's the DPRK, North Korea, Venezuela, Russia. All of these countries are under sanctions. We're not talking about one country. And we need to keep in mind, we need to understand that the West will not stop, because the West is in an economic war against these countries. Let's do some campaigns against sanctions, because it will basically bring, you know, some attention, maybe also in Europe, to this issue from ordinary people. But I think we cannot defeat the enemy in that way. The only way how to defeat the enemy is if the oppressed are raising up and uniting against the enemy. And like the very great leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi said, justice is with the oppressed. So let us please think about what is happening. Now actually Iran and Russia, Iran and Syria also, they are discussing, Iran and Syria especially is discussing an united banking system. There were even recently, just some days ago, also Russia published information about that they are maybe finally now moving away from the SWIFT system because they are threatened any day to be put out of the SWIFT system, so Russia can be any day cut off from international bank transfers, and it's a great threat for them. And other countries, for other countries, it's already happened. So I think it's very important to work on economic cooperation, on economic alternatives, which involve all these countries which I already mentioned. DPRK and Cuba, they're for decades under sanctions. They're cut off from international banking systems. Please involve them. Please involve Venezuela. We need to facilitate trade. I was speaking, for example, 1 year ago at a conference in Donetsk, of the Donetsk People's Republic, that they should cooperate with Syria. They have great products which they can sell to Syria, and Syria has great products which they can sell to Donetsk People's Republic. And finally, I saw this year when I went to the Rebuild Syria Fair, Donetsk People's Republic was actually having a great stand over there. They were trying to sell their products. They're getting into business with the Syrians. I think it's a really great step, and we should continue with this. But also I think that we need some kind of uniting ideology. We need some kind of uniting elements. I'm not saying about a big ideology, but we need at least some basis. Like, for example, it can be anti-imperialism. It can be our struggle against NATO. It can be our struggle against US imperialism, against the Zionists. And we need to use this as common basis to start some action. And I think there's some questions which I have, like, for example, like I said, now when I talked to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, he was actually telling now they're probably very soon going to invite a delegation from Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republic. They already recognized in the last year the Abkhazia and South Ossetia as independent states. And I'm basically asking our Iranian comrades, please try to cooperate with us. Please try to do the same. Please try to establish trade with these unrecognized anti-imperialist countries and try to do something about it, because I don't understand. If we're in an alliance together, if we have a common enemy, we should try to cooperate with each other. We should really try to facilitate trade and to cooperate also on political level with each other. It cannot be that now Iran is putting out statements that they want to have a good relationship with Ukraine and so on. We need to stick to our allies. We need to cooperate with our allies. And the same question I'm actually asking Russia. How can it be that Russia is right now, I know that Russia is thinking about the OPEC, they are thinking about the oil price. Russia is not thinking about our Yemeni brothers right now. They are trying to cooperate with Saudi Arabia, together with Venezuela and so on, with Saudi Arabia and the OPEC, because they think we somehow need to raise the oil price. We somehow need to stabilize the oil price to keep our economy somehow running. But I see on the same time, actually, that this is not working. Saudi Arabia has been selling oil on the black market. They have been the cause of this whole oil crisis right now. And so they are not a reliable partner. They are puppets of the US regime. So we cannot trust them. How can it be that Russia is not sticking, somehow trying to aid our Yemeni brothers? How can it be that Putin is putting out statements to sell S-400 systems to Saudi Arabia? What we saw actually when our Yemeni brothers were striking the Saudi oil, we saw an increase of the oil price by suddenly more than 10%. Why, as I already told, because Saudi Arabia is one of the main oil exporters. So, of course, if we finally get control over Saudi Arabian oil, then it can mean that we can control basically the whole global economy. So how can it be that Russia is keeping quiet about the Yemeni crisis? How can it be? I think it's not acceptable, and it's the same unacceptable that Iran is also not keeping quiet about the Donbas crisis. So please let us find ways how we can cooperate on these issues, how we can maybe, how Russia can, for example, deliver aid to the Yemeni people, and how something good can be done for both economies, and how we can finally create some kind of union between all of us. One last thing, I think what I already all mentioned is we need an institution, an actual institution to work on these issues. We need to discuss all of these economic issues which we have right now of the states which are under sanctions between each other on some kind of platform. There must be some kind of platform created especially for this reason, to discuss within these states these economic problems and how we can overcome them, how we can maybe try to abolish the US to trade with the US dollar, how we can create a different reserve currency, how we can do all of this. And of course, China can play a role in this, and we must just really be keen on putting forward some kind of platform to discuss these issues, because we can no longer wait and let the West just do what they want, and we must coordinate our resistance. Only that way we will be victorious against the imperialists. Only that way we will finally defeat them and turn the war, the economic war, against them.
If the guest would like to make a comment or a suggestion, please proceed. Okay. Yes, okay.
Translation, can you give me?
Yeah.
ليس لدي أي سؤال.
He has a question.
ليس لدي أي سؤال، وإنما فقط أردت أن أنطق بلسان كل مظلوم في الساحة اليمنية. أردت أن أنطق بلسان كل مقتول من الأطفال والنساء والشيوخ في الساحة اليمنية، وأشكر هذا الرجل العظيم الذي تكلم بهذه الكلمات التي تشفي صدور كل المستضعفين والمحرومين والمظلومين في الساحة اليمنية، فشكرا لك.
I want to ask you a question. Where is the difficulties to find another alternatives? It's because inside every state of us there are some people not very strong with these orientations, and I mean against imperialism, or because where is the problems you think that we couldn't establish, or making more institutions to in the academic level, on the intellectuals, economic, culture, where is the difficulty? Thank you.
To be honest, I think that some countries, maybe also Russia, maybe China and so on, are still afraid of going forward this step. Right now, as I told, China and the Trump administration and the US are in a direct global fight for global hegemony. So right now, for example, the majority of goods for European US markets, or like not the highest quality goods, but a lot of goods are produced in China only for the Western market. So what will happen if China is not anymore exporting these goods to the Western markets? It will also directly hit Chinese economy and put a lot of people into unemployment. So they are afraid, of course, to do this step. They are preparing, I think, with this project China 2025 towards a more stronger domestic market, so that they can be prepared for this kind of step. But the same, for example, for Russia. I think that Russia is, or at least let's say a bigger part of the elite in Russia, is so much afraid of completely breaking with the West. They are always trying to make a policy of appeasement, and they are trying to somehow keep a relationship at some level at least with the West, and they're only reacting when they're under direct threat. Even, I mean, the Syrian example is so great, because when did Russia actually intervene in Syria? It was so late. We always asked Russia, please understand, if you're not going to do anything about these terrorists, then these terrorists will go. They went from Libya to Syria. They will go from Syria later to the Caucasus. You will have another uprising in the Caucasus. It will be a big problem for Russia. But Russia only intervened after their main ports in Tartus and Latakia were threatened. So Russia is always trying just to be defensive in the last position. I think we need to establish a new idea. We need to be more aggressive. We need at least to somehow unite each other, and we should not be afraid anymore, because actually everything is already turning. you see like what is happening with China. I think the global power structure is already turning, and we need to discuss how the future should actually look like. That's the main important thing, and we should not be any more afraid, because it can cause troubles, but it can be very good for the future too. Mm-hmm.
Hello. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, come. Yeah, no. Two questions in one. Doesn't the experience of the last decade show that when one of the countries you mentioned, may it be Syria, may it be China, may it be Russia, Venezuela, Cuba, that if they have the freedom of choice all of the sudden to equip themselves from a likewise country or a Western liberal capitalist country, that they originally choose the Western capital country? This is the first question. The second question is, you were referring in your very good and powerful speech always with the word we. And we are both Germans. How big do you see the importance that instead of only creating a sort of network of those, let us call it in a positive way, underdog countries, yeah, who are all sanctioned and who are all suffering these problems. How big do you see the necessity that instead only of that we must also change our countries, that we must change Europe, that we must change our European identity in form of totally get rid of, for example, the United States, totally get rid of the values, what we call transatlanticist values, and come back to European values, and to solve the problems also by this, because I feel the same solidarity like you feel, yeah? So these were the two questions.
Okay, so just to understand the first one again, so why, do you ask why these countries were buying weapons from the West, basically?
Not just weapons. I just see that if, for example, the Russian Federation has the choice to buy something from Germany or from China, that they would rather buy it from Germany or from US. I see the same, maybe on several levels, would happen with Iran. And I sorry, sir, this is not an attack against Syria, but I have a feeling that if the sanctions would be over, that we would see Damascus overflown by US-American businessmen, and that they would do big business there, and not necessarily the Russians, and not necessarily the Chinese, not necessarily those who help today. And that is like a natural law we were seeing in the last 10, 20 years. That was the question, how to prevent this and how to deal with it. Not just weapons.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you that how you said, like, I mean, Syria is right now, they are preparing that all of these investors who left, like from the Gulf countries and so on, that they're basically returning back to Syria and bring their money. But of course, I understand on the other side also that right now there is some investment of Russia in Syria, but there's also not that big investment. So we have all our own economic problems, and I understand both positions, I understand both sides, but I think it's more important to actually discuss these problems. So Syria should, for example, go forward, push forward and say, like, we have a housing problem in Syria. We need, for example, other countries which can invest, which are maybe allied countries, which can invest in our housing market and can actually get a decent number of profits out of it, maybe even in future. But let's keep it underneath each other. Don't ask again the same countries which destroyed already our country, invite them again and ask them to invest only so that they can make the profit out of it. Please ask somebody who's one of our allies. So I think it's another ideological problem, especially Russia. I mean, Russia is not anymore the Soviet Union. It's basically a random capitalist countries which has, to at least some degree, some side kind of state capitalism, but it is actually arguing, it is actually working under free market things. So in Russia, I think there's another problem. They don't understand how basically political trade works like. So the US, actually, it's a capitalist country, but they understand why they need the Saudis, for example. So they will, of course, deal with specific countries so that they will give them money, or they will give them some credits, they will buy their products. Like, why is the US like buying stuff from Ukraine? Why is, for example, why is the US forcing Europe to buy gas from the US? This all has to do with political trade, with political ideas within trade. And this is something which is Russia just currently not used to. They don't have this idea. They think of just basic capitalism, and we will just buy whatever cheap is, but maybe some can have some good quality. But Russia should, of course, as you said, think a lot more of, maybe we will buy a product from one of our partners which is maybe not the best quality, but is something which we can use on our domestic market, where we are not using our money to give it just to these countries. And it will also strengthen the Russian economy, because the Russian economy is still deindustrialized after the fall of the Soviet Union. It is a major problem. Like, how can it be that all these German products are in Russia, and that they are only exporting oil and importing all these products from Western Europe and Germany? It is a huge economic problem. One more thing about European independence, because this was your second question. Yes, absolutely. I think, especially me as a German, I'm so angry when I think about that there are more than 40 US military bases in Germany, that we are still under some kind of occupation by the US military forces, that we don't have certain freedom. But we must be, I think, very serious about what is going on in Western Europe, and especially Germany. I think the European Union and Germany are becoming more restrictive every single day. We know it from your own case that basically free speech is being sanctioned. You cannot even criticize easiest things, like the migrant crisis, like this crazy kind of environmentalism which is going on right now. You are just being discredited. We cannot even invite, I mean, what is going on? We cannot even invite Jews to speak about the problems of Zionism. We are always like if we are trying to rent a room for some kind of event, they are throwing out of the rooms, the media is going against us. So there is no free speech in the West. So the question is like, I want to build up a resistance movement also within the Western countries, but I think under this hegemony, what we are living right now, under this, monopoly of opinion which is happening right now in Europe, it is so hard to form any kind of opposition. Maybe it can be a solution that these more right-wing powers are getting into force, but we also don't know. I'm not sure if it will work. We see that the left-wing forces are sadly totally overtaken by liberalism, and I think that basically it's a problem of European parliamentarism, because everybody who goes into politics in Europe faces the same problem. Either you're going to say, I love Israel, I love the US, I'm for NATO, and you can say maybe, okay, you can be a bit critical about the refugees then if you say all of this, but they are depending on the people, as our Syrian friend already said, they are depending on the people who pay them. Might this be the parliament, might this be the news and TV channels, so there is no possibility even for this resistance. And I think that was already what I quoted before. We should not always look to Europe. It is a problem, for example, also for Russia always to look to Europe. Russia always hopes maybe there will be change in Europe, maybe there will be change in the US. No. The only possibility is to be the change, to do it ourselves, to unite our forces, because the people who are affected, the people who are suffering, they must do something. We cannot ask somebody who is sitting in Germany, who sees this media, they have no idea about what is really going on in Yemen, in Syria and so on. They don't know it. They are busy with their own problem. They have maybe problems with their girlfriend and their wife. They have problems at their work. They have problems to afford their flats. They are busy with all these problems, and they cannot understand the other situation. So we, the people who have actually the problems, the people who are in these countries which are resisting, they must unite, they must rise up and do something. We cannot leave it up to the Europeans, we cannot leave it up to the resistance in the Western liberal countries, because we are a minority. So please do something from the people who are affected, from the people who are actually suffering. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anthony?
Yes, I just wanted to, I think I didn't mention the genocide taking place in Yemen, and that clearly is a genocide, and that should be identified. And Congo is an old story that has to be sorted out. I want to address the sort of organizational requirements of the type of transformations that you're talking about, Tobias, and the gentleman beside our Yemeni friend. Your presentation this morning, very inspiring presentation, sir, speaking of economic alternatives and needing to reconfigure the economic system. It seems to me that you two have a lot of points in common that could be discussed. But this very ambitious vision that you present of the changes that need to take place and the networking that must take place and the public education that must take place and the intercultural discussions that must take place. We have a device which has been, a huge boon to humanity in some ways, the internet. And the internet is being transformed, radically transformed. The internet is very quickly being transformed into an instrument to serve the established powers. And there's censorship, and especially the search mechanisms, the way that you lead people away from some sources towards other sources. So I think part of our big picture thinking, where we imagine a different world and imagine what we have to do in this moment of unbelievable emergency and crisis, where if we don't do things, it's over, it's doomed. We have to change our ways dramatically, and we have to deal with this situation with the internet and develop alternatives there too.
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
Hi, Vida Ward, Palestinian Canadian. I totally agree with what Tony had to say. This is what I had prepared, what I wanted to talk about. Is I see, first of all, I thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to sit with such beautiful scholars who are so on fighting terrorism. And when I talk about terrorism, I don't talk about ISIS only, I talk about Trump. So when, the US administration, the current US administration, and the Israeli occupation. But we've heard so many experiences from everybody. We've heard everyone talking about new ideas and what have you, but there's nothing really being done that we can hear about. There's not a real activity online. I mean, social media is where the public opinions are made right now. Social media is very important. It's where everything starts right now. And we are not taking this opportunity to speak our minds. We are not taking this opportunity to be active or contact the activists around the world who can agree with us. When you talk about uniting, this is how we have to start uniting. When you want to talk about uniting countries, we have to have the power to talk to our countries, to me as a Canadian, Tony as a Canadian. We face a problem talking to our countries about Zionism. You know, right away we are flagged as anti-Semitics. But to get to our people, we have to first to get to our country or administration, we have to get first to our people, where we have the power to push on our government to change their policies. For the past 10 years, Canada has changed from the beautiful country where the peaceful country, the polite country, to the speaker in the name of Zionist lobby. And we were talking about this, me and Tony, and I was just telling him that, first of all, I'm a Palestinian originally, Palestinian born, then I am a Canadian. I am proud of being both. But in the same time, when I used to talk to my American friends, And they used to, usually they make fun of us as Canadians because we're being so polite, okay? Now, I used to tell, like when I used to speak back to them, I said, well, at least we're not killing children around the world. But now with the Zionist lobby taking over in Canada and not allowing Tony to talk his mind, you know, this effect in the governments, we're not, what I'm trying to say is that we're not getting to the people, you know, to change policies in governments, to talk to governments, to get governments to change their policies. You have to get to the people first. There's a huge thing called social media now that we are not taking advantage of. We have to try to contact as many activists around the world so they can work with us, they can try to say the truth. We are being fought because we are telling the truth. When you say we should unite, who is we? If there's a Canadian here, there are Americans that were stopped from coming here, and you say we against the enemy. Who's the enemy? An American against his country, considering his country an enemy. I can't consider Canada as an enemy. As a German, he can't consider Germany as an enemy. Who is we against what enemy? The enemy is within. You know, the enemy is within our governments, and this is what we should stand against. And I think we should, I'm sorry for taking so long, but I think we should try to find a mechanism where we can contact people around the world, where we can, from there, you know, push against our government or push our governments to take the right stand, because we are being fought because we're telling the truth. Thank you.
So, just because you said about social media and so on, let me just tell, for example, now the DPRK in North Korea, they are not even connected right now officially to our Western internet. So, of course, we will, for example, need to find other ways to communicate to our comrades over there. And of course, we need also to see and understand, like, what was happening 2011 with the social media. What were all these accounts publishing during the Arab Spring? Of course, it were bot networks run by the US and run by Western states, which were trying to put forward some kind of agenda. So we have the social media, which on one side can unite us, but it can also be used as a weapon against us. And the same with Facebook, for example. Yes, of course, I also like to use Facebook, but also there is no free speech on Facebook. There is no possibility to post a picture of a Hezbollah flag or a picture of Hassan Nasrallah on Facebook. That's crazy. So right now we are basically using Western institutions all the time. And what I'm calling for is finally to get away from Western institutions and to form our own institutions, to unite our people by forming our own institutions. If it might be social media, if it might be banking, if it might be everything. So I agree absolutely with you. We must unite, we must exchange, we must use also social media, but we must always also keep in mind that these institutions are right now all run by Western states. I
totally agree with you. My account on Facebook has been blocked about 20,000 times each time for God knows how long. I totally agree with you, and only for reporting news, you know, that mentioned Hezbollah, just the name Hezbollah. Now it's not just about pictures, it's just about the name of Hezbollah and Nasrallah. You are blocked right away. I totally agree with you. But who's willing to put the money to create such a gigantic social media outlet? Nobody's willing to put, everybody wants something cheap. You know, everybody wants it cheap. But if these countries unite, like for example, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and put some good money to create such a global social media outlet, you know, yeah. But to stand against Twitter and Facebook and all those huge companies. But if you're not willing to put the money into it, if the countries are not willing to put the country into it, then there's no chance. Then the West will still control the public opinions.
So there are, of course, I think there are some alternatives. There's, for example, the Kontakte network in Russia. It's you find it under vk.com. So there are some, of course, there are some alternatives. It should be worked on, of course, to create other alternative. But I think that the main question which we always should keep in focus is the economic problematic within, like, let's say, the anti-imperialist states, and then we can, of course, try to extend the information war onto the West. Yes.
Just 1 second. I agree with all, but I think in this conference are the very right people to carry this idea in their homelands and to do something. That is what I mean. I think this is why such conferences can be good, not just for talking and having afterwards a good shisha and coffee, but I think that here are everywhere the right people who can go back and go to their governments, go to the companies and create something out of it.
Yes, that's basically, thank you, Mohamed. I think that's what we all need to do and where we all need to work on. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Tobias. Young Tobias, very energetic, got everybody running. And I think before we disassemble tomorrow, and we're going to have a couple of good days running around Lebanon, having a good time. But you know, the reason we convened is, as you said, it's not to make a conference and make a few speeches and make a little media splash and have a good time together and think. We have to do something structural and strategic. I think just networking through the social media is not enough. While we are here, I suggest, while we're here, we should sit together, those who have that sort of a mindset. We have people from all parts of the world. We have key people from many parts of the world who have already established themselves as thought leaders, and they're influential, and that's why the enemy is very sensitive to them. They call one a fascist. They call the other a terrorist. They know that we are making some effect. Before we disassemble from this New Horizon conference, as we had in the past in Mashhad, we did the same thing. I think we should sit down and take some time and think about what to do. You know, what to do. Try to be as creative as the enemy is. They have the money, they have the means, they have the power, they have the empire, but they can be, the reverse can happen. Well, why do we have a conference? Why does people spend some money, get plane tickets, get a hotel reserved, convene here? Is it to make a propaganda stance so we become the next president? What are we doing here? We have to make plans. I think before we convene, before we all separate our ways, one goes to Moscow, another goes to Tehran, another goes to Malaysia, other goes to Germany. Let's put a time, I think, to think what to do. Let's try to strategize just as intensely as the enemy does. The enemy puts a lot of time thinking. Why do you think they have Camp Davids? They take 4 days off. Why does Bush have his farm in Texas? All the leaders gather there for 4 days and night. They don't just eat hamburgers and play pool or tennis or ride a horse. They're thinking how to manipulate. While we're here in this beautiful hotel, which is a very artistic hotel in the world, the purpose was for us to sit down and think. Now we're all thinking separately, each one in their table, and then in the conference you have a speech. But let's take the time, those who are concerned. It doesn't concern everyone. I mean, not everyone thinks like that. To sit down and think what to do next. Where to hold the next conference. This gentleman from Syria said, the next conference come to Damascus. Well, that's a good idea. I was thinking about going to Iraq. Well, we can do one in Damascus. We have a man there who is the center of attention, Mr. Bashar Assad. And this is where a lot of changes are happening. So that's a possibility. I mean, let's think of practical things too. Let's think of practical things, and let's think of creativity and innovation. And inshallah, God willing, we'll come up with some new ideas. Don't let the conversation finish with us just going separate ways and shaking hands and congratulating each other. I really wish something else would come out of this. I mean, as long as we have these serious intentions, which I know you mentioned so many serious things. You're in Germany. You have a good potential to do a lot of things. We have a lot of youth in the world. I mean, there's so many things we can do, but we should sit down and think. That's the most important thing. Think, and God willing, come up with some new ideas, how to make them more, at least more uncomfortable with what they're doing with us, make them uneasy with what they're doing with us, or make plans that will change things, God willing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tobias. Thank you for attending. The last guest in this today, before the panel discussion that will take place after the break, the last guest is Ms. Sandrella Malaz. Today she is representing Mr. Mateusz Piskorski, who's a very close friend of ours. However, he was jailed for 3 years, and when we asked him to come to attend our New Horizon conference, he was very excited. However, he was banned by the court to attend and to leave the country. So we had to, he sent Sandrella over to represent him. She asked me if we would not be able to, she would not be able to answer a lot of your questions, but if you have any questions to Mateusz, you can write them down, and she would gladly send them over to him with your email, and he will get back to you. There's a video about her. Yeah, 1 minute, please.
It's okay? Yeah? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of God, beneficent and merciful. Like this, yeah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you. I'd like to begin by saying that this is the honor for me to be able to take part in such a great event, in the company of many of great and brave people that we live in difficult times that need brave people, times when falsehood is being elevated and truth is being persecuted, times when courage to say the truth or protest against injustice can get you into the prison or even can cost you your life. This persecution takes on many forms and takes place not just in Palestine, of the hands of the Zionist regime, but all over the world, including many of so-called civilized European countries. Let us remember, however, that it is precisely the toughest of the times and the hardest of experience that generate the biggest heroes. And this is also the lesson from the Battle of Karbala that we should remember. Imam Ali alayhi salam said, "There are two ways to live your life, good and evil. And there are two types of people, those who follow the straight path and those who follow the path of wickedness." That's why I believe that we are in the right place today, showing by our presence here that we have chosen the side of good and straight path, the side of dignity and humanity, rejecting oppression and lawlessness. A few months ago, my friend and comrade from our party, the chairman of the Change Party, Mateusz Piskorski, was released from custody due to lack of evidence against him. The media reported that he was being accused of spying for Russia, China, Iraq. The real charges, however, which has only been formulated after 3 years of baseless custody, state shaping public opinion and participation in information war. What's even more tragic, such charges are not subject to Polish criminal code. They are not offenses in Poland, and voicing your opinion cannot be made out to be an aspect of spying. If it was offense, you could lock up virtually any inconvenient journalist, politician, publicist, or even a teacher who voices opinion contrary to current authorities. It is unfortunately a dangerous practice when prosecution goes against its own law and clearly acts under political directions, when judges don't judge fairly, when power and authority is being used not for good of the people and truth, but for oppression, silences, and exerting pressure. It is happening not just in Poland, but in many countries all over the world. Regrettably, despite being released from custody, the case is proceeding as prosecution didn't manage to gather its evidence and interview witnesses